So today in grammar, we're going to be talking about clauses. So the title of today's notes is clauses, and then write the date. Clauses, C-L-A-U-S-E-S, not like Santa Claus. Now this is a vocabulary word, a grammar vocab word that we've already had, but let's just do a quick review. A clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a predicate. So a clause is a group of words that contains a subject and a predicate. Independent clauses, we again already know this, but we'll do a quick review. An independent clause, so don't put clauses, just put clause, so just erase that S if you already wrote it. If not, don't write the rest. An independent clause is a clause, so a group of words that contains a subject and a predicate, that can stand alone as a sentence. For example, Marianne got an award. An example of an independent clause is Marianne got an award. What is the subject in this sentence, in this independent clause? Victoria.
Marianne.
Marianne, because the subject is who or what did something or is something in the sentence. What is the predicate in this sentence? Carla?
Got an award.
Got an award. Because that is the what happened or what something is in our clause. So an independent clause is a clause which means it has a subject and a predicate that can stand alone as a sentence. But now today we've already talked about clauses and independent clauses. Today we're going to talk about a new type of clause called a dependent clause. So we've learned about clauses and independent clauses, but today we're adding a new type of clause called a dependent clause. I spelled that super wrong. Dependent clause. D-E-P-E-N-D-E-N-T. Dependent clause, which is a clause, so it means it has to have a subject and a predicate, but a dependent clause is a clause that cannot, underline the word cannot, stand alone as a sentence. So a dependent clause is a clause, that means it has a subject and a predicate, that cannot stand alone as a sentence, so it can't be a sentence. And you may be thinking, but I thought as long as a group of words had a subject and a predicate, it was a complete sentence. Well, that's not the case, because there are dependent clauses that can't stand alone as a sentence. For example, because she won first place. That is not a complete sentence. There is a subject. What's the subject in this clause, this group of words? What is the subject in this group of words? Who or what is doing something or is something in this sentence? Colin.
She.
She. She is the subject. What did she do, or what is she? What's the predicate? Michaela? The whole predicate, the complete predicate. Won first place. So we have a subject, and she, and we have a predicate. What did she do? She won first place. But this word because means it cannot stand alone as a sentence.
You want us to kind of like squiggly do that like he did?
Yes. So that you know it's not circled like subjects and it's not underlined like predicates. It is just its own thing that makes this not able to stand alone. Because if I said, because she won first place, is that a complete thought?
No.
Zadie?
No.
No. If I said, she won first place, is that a complete thought, Zadie?
No.
Yes. She won first place. You have all the information. She won first place. Cool. Congratulations. But if it says, because she won first place, what about it? Because she won first place, what happened? If you see the word because, then you know you're using what comes after it as an explanation. But do we know what this is explaining? Colin?
No.
No, we don't know what this is explaining because all it says is because she won first place. So that means when you guys say, when a question says, why is this the way it is? And you say, because it does this. Did you write in a complete sentence? Carla?
No.
No, you cannot start a sentence with because unless something happens that we will talk about on Friday. You cannot start a sentence with because until Friday. Because you don't know how. Because she won first place is not a complete sentence. Because we don't know why it says because. If it just said she won first place, well, that's all we really need to know. But if it says because she won first place, we don't know why it says because. So it's not a complete sentence. It cannot stand alone. Okay, I'm going to erase what I have up here because I need more room. Is everybody ready to move on?
Yes.
So this goes underneath dependent clause. So you can do a little space underneath. Like here was, let's see. Here was clauses. So you don't need to write this because I'm just modeling how you can show it so that it makes sense. Then we had independent clauses and dependent clauses over a little bit. And then you can move over a little bit and add this next part. Because this next part goes with dependent clauses. I don't know, dependent is just a word that I have trouble spelling. or just thinking about as I spell it. So you can go over a little bit because this is a sentence. A dependent clause I just answered that question. I said you do not have to write clauses or dependent. So now I'm interrupting our lesson to answer a question that I just answered. You do not have to write clauses or dependent clauses. I'm modeling how to show it in your notebook. But yes, you do have to write what I am currently writing. A dependent clause, often, that means not all the time, not very little of the time, but often. A dependent clause often begins with a connecting word, but not and, but, or. I will give you examples of the connecting words that it does often start with, but it does not start with and, but, or. Because that is what you use in compound sentences. And we are learning about something different. So a dependent clause often begins with a connecting word, but not and, but, or. Here is a list of connecting words that a dependent clause will typically start with. Before. For example, I went outside before I went to bed. I went outside is the independent clause. Before I went to bed is the dependent clause. Because if I said before I went to bed, does that tell you why it says the word before? So is that a complete thought? No. Before, another one is because. Like the sentences that we used in the examples, Marianne got an award because she won first place. Well, Marianne is the independent clause. Because she won first place is the dependent clause. Because do we know why it says because if all we have is because she got first place? No. Another one is when. If I said, when I go outside, is that a complete thought? Do you know why I said the word when? So that would be a dependent clause. Where? If I said,
Where are you going?
no, because where are you going? That's a complete thought. But if I'm starting an independent clause with where, like if I said, you won't typically be using where. So that is a word that can be used well, actually, we'll use it later today. But we'll see an example later. Where? As soon as. If I said, as soon as I go outside, is that a complete thought? Do you know why I said as soon as? Make sure that you're not just ignoring my voice. But if I said, as soon as I go outside, I can play with my friend, then it makes sense. You just have to add more information. Another clause. Another example. after. If I said after I go outside, do you know why I said after? So it's a dependent clause because I go outside has a subject and a predicate, but if I say after I go outside, it doesn't make sense by itself. Another example is since. I ate dinner is an independent clause. Since I ate dinner is not. Do you know why I said since? No, so I have to add more information. I get to eat dessert since I ate my dinner. Another example is although. If I said she was tired, that makes sense. That can stand alone. But if I said although she was tired, does that make sense? Do you know why I said although? You can just show me. No. But if I said she couldn't fall asleep although she was tired, well then it makes sense. But although she was tired does not. If I said, you do your homework, that makes sense. I'm telling you, you do your homework. But if I said, if you do your homework, can that stand alone? Do we know why it says if? So I have to add more information. You can go outside if you do your homework. So these are words that you will usually see before dependent clauses. That means you'll have you'll have a subject and a predicate afterwards, but because of these words, it can't stand alone. You have to add more information for it to make sense with these words. So right now, what we're going to do is I am going to give you your guided practice. So girls at home, get out the one sheet that says GP under the name. You should be looking at the page that says GP under the word name. We're going to do this together. Now, normally I say you better read the box. But for today, we're not going to read that because that's what we're going to learn about on Friday. But what we're going to do is we are going to take two independent clauses. Each of these examples has two independent clauses. Two pieces that can stand alone. What we're going to do is we are going to combine them so that one is independent and one is independent and one is dependent. They're giving us the word to use to make the clause dependent. Remember, when you're making a dependent clause, you use the connecting word before it. So, for example, number 1, we have our two independent clauses. Make sure you are focusing. The astronaut eats his meal. That makes sense. That can stand alone. He floats around in the rocket. That makes sense. That can stand alone. But we can take this second independent clause and turn it into a dependent clause by putting the word as before it. So what this looks like, my first sentence is going to keep being an independent clause. The astronaut eats his meal. But now, instead of putting a period and then writing my next independent clause, I'm going to turn he floats around in the rocket into a dependent clause by saying as he floats rocket, period. Notice I did not put a comma between them. I just wrote the first independent clause, the astronaut eats his meal, and then I added the connecting word before my second sentence to turn it into an independent clause. So what we're going to do is we're going to underline the independent clause once in each of these sentences, and we're going to underline the dependent clause twice. So what is the independent clause in this sentence? What is the independent clause in this sentence? The astronaut eats his meal as he floats around in the rocket. Aaron, what is the independent clause? That means the part that can stand alone.
The astronaut eats his meal.
The astronaut eats his meal. So I'm going to underline it once because that makes sense. We don't have any words that make us question what are they talking about. The astronaut eats his meal. If we do have questions, they're just questions. Well, what did he eat? But do we necessarily need to know what he ate for this sentence to make sense? Class?
No.
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 Now the dependent clause, the part that cannot stand alone as a sentence, is what? Aaron, go ahead and do this one too.
He floats around in the rocket.
He floats around in the rocket. Are there any words in there that make us question what it's talking about? So is the dependent clause, he floats around in the rocket? Does a dependent clause make sense by itself? So he floats around in the rocket makes sense. So is that a dependent clause? No. Remember what? Look at your notes. What do dependent clauses often start with? Look at your notes, Aaron. It literally says a sentence. A dependent clause often begins, what does that sentence say?
A dependent clause often begins with a connecting word.
Okay? So, he floats around in his rocket. Is there a connecting word at the beginning of that? No, but what is the whole clause that does start with a connecting word?
As he floats around in the rocket.
As he floats around in the rocket. Because if all we had was the sentence, as he floats around in the rocket, is that a complete thought? Or is there a word there that makes us wonder what they're talking about? Aaron, listen to my question, please. As he floats around in the rocket, does that make sense all by itself? Or is there a word there that makes us wonder why is it using that word?
Yes.
What word is making us wonder what are they talking about? As. So the astronaut eats his meal is an independent clause. It makes sense all by itself. Focus. As he floats around in the rocket does not. It has a subject, he, and a predicate, floats around in the rocket. But that word as makes us wonder, okay, as what? As he floats around in the rocket, what? What happens? We need a reason for the word as. If we only have as he floats around in the rocket, we don't have that. Number 2, light leaves a star. It takes thousands of years to reach Earth. We need to combine those using the connecting word after. We might have to rearrange. Who thinks they can combine these using the word after so that the sentence makes sense? Then we'll go through and we'll find the independent and the dependent clause. Now this one we put it in order. Sometimes we won't be able to put it in order. Victoria? What would the independent clause? We want to put the independent clause first. Which one needs to be the independent clause? Is it light leaves a star? Or is it takes thousands of years to reach Earth? Which one of those clauses is going to come first?
After light leaves a star.
We're not using the connecting word yet. Which one of those things happens first?
Light leaves a star.
think I confused you. I think you were on the right track. Which one of those things has to happen first? Light leaves a star, or it takes thousands of years to reach Earth? Which one has to happen first? Don't worry about the word after. Does the light leave the star first, or does it take thousands of years to reach Earth first? The light leaves a star first. So that means that has to be the independent clause. Which means we're putting that has to be the dependent clause. So we have to put it takes thousands of years to reach Earth after light leaves a star. We can't say light leaves a star after it takes thousands of years to reach Earth, because the light has to leave the star first. It can't take thousands of years if it never left the star. So now, looking at this sentence, what part is the independent clause? Which part are we going to underline once? Is it takes thousands of years to reach Earth? Or is it after light leaves a star? Zari? Which one is the independent clause?
It takes thousands of years to reach Earth.
Good. It is the subject, takes thousands of years to reach Earth is the predicate. Now we may wonder, what are you talking about? But it still makes sense. There's no word here that makes us wonder, well, what about it? Zari, which part is the dependent clause? Which part cannot stand alone?
After light leaves a star.
After light leaves a star. We have a subject, light, and a predicate, leaves a star, but that word after means it can't stand alone. After light leaves a star, well, you're left wondering, what happens after it leaves the star? Okay, number 3. We have our first independent clause, eat some freeze-dried snacks. Ooh, who remembers this? I don't see a subject here, but what is the subject? Just because we can't see it, what is the subject in this sentence? Kingston, you think you know? What is it? Is that what's doing something in the sentence? Are the freeze-dried snacks doing something? We learned about this. We talked about this. Cullen, what is it?
Eat.
Eat is not a thing that can do something. Zadie? You. We talked about this. We saw that in the video. Sometimes if you have a command, you may not see the subject in the sentence. That's because it's an understood you. You is still a subject even though it's not here, because I'm telling you, eat some freeze-dried snacks. But I don't have to say the word you. If it's anybody else, I have to say it. Eat some freeze-dried snacks. You work at the computer. How can we combine these using the word while? Who thinks they know? How can we combine these using the word while? The word while is not going to come first. Zadie?
Eat some freeze-dried snacks while you work at the computer.
Very good. Eat some freeze-dried snacks while you work at the computer. Eat freeze-dried snacks while you work at the computer. Zadie, which part of that is the independent clause? Which part can stand alone as a sentence if we pulled it out?
Eat some freeze-dried snacks.
Eat some freeze-dried snacks. We have the understood you, which is our subject, and eat some freeze-dried snacks, which is our predicate. We don't have any words that leave us wonder, okay, what happened because of that or anything like that. Now, Zadie, what is the independent clause? I'm sorry, the dependent clause, the part that can't stand alone.
While you work at the computer.
While you work at the computer. Because we do have a subject and a predicate. We have the subject you, and we have the predicate work at the computer, but that word while means it can't stand alone. Because if I just said, while you work at the computer, you would wonder, why is that word while there? I don't know. Ethan, put them away. Focus. Very good. At while means while you work at the computer, can't stand alone. Number 4, he goes to the library. He reads books about space. How can we combine those two sentences using the word where? Where cannot come first. Carla, where cannot be the first word.
He goes to the library where he reads.
You got it. Keep going.
Where he reads books about space.
Good. He goes to the library where he reads books about space. Now you're going to have to work on your handwriting so that it all fits. Because the older you get, the smaller your handwriting has to get. You've probably noticed most of your parents, when they're really writing, their handwriting is not big and giant. It's a smaller size so that it fits. Okay, quickly, Aaron.
Usually when my dad writes, I can't tell what he says because he doesn't really need small.
Exactly. Because grown-ups have to write small a lot. We have to fill out forms, which means we have to write small. Because if we write really big, well then either whoever is receiving the form either can't read the writing that was already there, or they can't read our writing because the form is in the way. So the older you get, the smaller you have to make your writing, and we're going to work on that this year. Still has to be neat because it has to be small and readable. Okay, Carla. We have he goes to the library where he reads books about space. Which part of that sentence is the independent clause? Which part can stand by itself? Remember, independent means by itself. So an independent clause is the part that can stand by itself. Carla, which part is the independent clause?
He goes to the library.
He goes to the library. So we're going to underline it once. We have the subject he. We have the predicate goes to the library. We understand that means what that means. It's just talking about a boy. He's going to the library. It doesn't leave us with any questions. Carla, which part is the dependent clause? Which part cannot stand alone?
Where he reads books about space.
Good. Where he reads books about space is the dependent clause because we have a subject, he, and a predicate, reads books about space, but that word where means we have questions. Why did you say where? What about that? Where he reads books at the library, okay? We need more information. Where means it cannot stand alone as a sentence. Thank you, Carla. Number 5, Mom doesn't want me to come along. It is dangerous. How can we combine those two sentences, those two independent clauses, using the word since? Cullen, did you do one yet? Okay.
Mom doesn't want me to come along since it is dangerous.
Good. Make sure that if there, some of you are not doing this, if there are capitals in the sentence, you need to have capitals. Unless, of course, we are combining sentences and you're doing the first letter of the second sentence. Mom doesn't want me to come along since it is dangerous. Don't forget end punctuation. Some of you are still forgetting that. And that was our very first day of grammar, was end punctuation. Do not forget that. I don't know if you guys realize, but you're losing a half a point every time you forget end punctuation. That adds up quickly. Hey, Cullen, Mom doesn't want me to come along since it is dangerous. Which part of this sentence is the independent clause? Which part can stand by itself?
Mom doesn't want me to come along. Mom does not want me to come along.
Mom doesn't want me to come along. We have the subject mom. We have the predicate doesn't want me to come along. Mom doesn't want me to come along makes sense all by itself. But which part is the dependent clause? Which part would not make sense if we pulled it out and put it by itself, Cullen?
Since it is dangerous.
Since it is dangerous. We have a subject, it, and we have a predicate, is dangerous, but which word makes it not make sense all by itself?
Since.
Since. Good. Number 6, fasten your seatbelts. The ship takes off. How would we combine those two sentences using the word before? Smith.
Fasten your seatbelts before the ship takes off.
Good. Would it make sense to say the ship takes off before you fasten your seatbelts? Smith?
No.
No, you want to make sure that you put your seatbelt on before it takes off. Otherwise, you're going to end up pretty hurt. Okay, so good. Fasten your seatbelts before the ship takes off. Don't forget end punctuation. Smith, which part of that sentence is the independent clause and can stand all on its own?
Fasten your seatbelt.
Good, because we have the subject, which is the understood you. We don't see you, but we know they're talking to you. Hey, you, fasten your seatbelts. So we have the subject, you, and the predicate, fasten your seatbelts. Which part is the dependent clause, Smith?
Before the ship takes off.
Before the ship takes off. We have the subject, the ship, and we have the predicate, takes off, but which word makes it a dependent clause, Smith?
Before.
Before. We have to know why it says before. Before the ship takes off, what? What do I do? If you only have before the ship takes off, you have no idea what you do. You have to have more information. Number 7, he brought a chunk of moon rock. He came home for the holidays. How would we combine those two sentences using when? How would we combine those two sentences using when? Zari?
He brought a chunk of moon rock when he came for the holidays.
Good. Except don't forget, you forgot a word.
When he came for the holidays.
Yeah, you remembered the connecting word, but you forgot a sentence. You forgot a word that's in the sentences. You can't forget words. You can't leave out words.
He brought a chunk of a moon rock.
No.
When he came home from
Okay, yes, you forgot the word home before. Just now you said from instead of for. Make sure, because if you said when he came home from the holidays, that means he's leaving the holidays. But this is saying it is the holidays he's coming home. Do not change words. Do not skip words, even if you think it's not important. Every single word is important, otherwise they wouldn't put it. So yes, it is. He brought a chunk of moon rock when he came home for the holidays. End punctuation. Always, before you turn anything in, check for end punctuation. Carla, hand down for right now, unless it's an emergency. Zari, he brought a chunk of moon rock when he came home for the holidays. Which part of that sentence is the independent clause and can stand alone?
He brought a chunk of a moon rock.
You're adding words. Is the word a moon rock there? Or is it just of moon rock?
He brought a chunk of moon rock.
Good. Remember, even if you think it's not important, it is. If the word a was supposed to be there, they would have put it. Good. He brought a chunk of moon rock. He is the subject. Brought a chunk of moon rock is the predicate. There are no words that are making us think, well, what about it? We may wonder, but that's more curiosity than because we need it. We don't need any more information for this to make sense. Zari, which part does not make sense on its own? Which part is a dependent clause?
When he came home for the holidays.
Good. When he came home for the holidays is the dependent clause because we have the subject he and we have the predicate came home for the holidays. But which word makes it not able to stand alone? Which word makes it a dependent clause, Zari?
When.
When. Very good. Because we see that when, we have to have a reason for it. If all we have is when he came home from the holidays, do we have a reason for the word when, Zari?
No.
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 Good. Last one, number 8. They watched the rocket blasted off into space. Who can combine those into one sentence? Michaela.
They watched.
Louder.
They watched as the rocket blast off into space.
Good, but it's blasted.
Blasted off.
Good. They watched as the rocket blasted off into space. End punctuation. They watched as the rocket blasted off into space. Which part of that sentence is the independent clause and can stand alone, Michaela?
They watched.
They watched. We have a subject, they, and we have a predicate, watched. We don't need any more information. We might like more information, but do we need more information for it to make sense, Michaela? No. Which part is the dependent clause? Which part cannot stand alone as a sentence, Michaela? Good. As the rocket blasted off into space. We have a subject, the rocket, and we have a predicate, blasted off into space. But what word makes this not able to stand alone, Michaela? As. Because we have to have a reason for as. If all we know is as the rocket blasted off into space, do we have a reason for the word as? Michaela? No. They watched is the reason. But if that wasn't there, it would not make sense. Okay.
Miss Bella, did you say this is good as what you're talking about, small?
Yes. You just have to make sure that it fits, but we can all still read it. You can read it, I can read it. Anybody who's looking at it can still read it. It's small enough that it fits, but it's big enough that we can all still read it. Okay, so now it's time for the independent practice. So those of you at home, get out the sheets. There's 2 of them. You may have printed them front and back. That's okay. But they both say IP under the word name. Okay, so everybody look at the front of the independent practice. The title is Finding Independent and Dependent Clauses Worksheets. This is the front. Make sure your name, number, and date is on the front. So everybody right now, write your name, number, and date on the top, on the front. The front is titled Finding Independent and Dependent Clauses Worksheets. If you are writing your name on the side that says Writing Complex Sentences Worksheet, you are not on the front. You need to be on the side that says Finding Independent and Dependent Clauses Worksheets. Once you have finished writing your name, number, and date on that side, look up. Thank you, Smith. Okay, so the directions, there are 2 parts to this page. There are 2 places where it says directions. Put your finger on each place where it says directions. There are 2 places where it says directions. Put your finger on each place. There's one right about here, and then there's one right about here. Okay, Zari, I see. Carla, have you found the 2 places where it says? Yes. And Smith, you have. Colin, you have. Zadie, have you found the 2 places where it says directions? Michaela, have you found the 2 places? Aaron, have you found the 2 places? Victoria, have you found the 2 places? Kingston, have you found the 2 places? Have you? Say yes or no. Ethan, have you found the 2 places where it says directions? There's 2 places. That's only one. There are 2 places where it says directions. That's one. Where's the other? So this is one. Where's the other place where it says directions? Look at the first part. The part towards the top that says directions. It says, underline the independent clause in each sentence below. Now, the independent clause may not always be the first part. In what we did today, yes, it was. But the independent clause does not always have to be first, and we'll learn about why on Friday. But what you're doing is in each of these sentences, numbers 1 through 6, you are finding the independent clause and underlining it. So look at example A. Example A says, everybody look at example A, otherwise you are going to be lost. Example A, under the first direction, says, although we ran, we never finished on time. They underline the independent clause, we never finished on time, because that has enough information to be a complete sentence. Although we ran. Is that enough information to be all alone, Colin?
No.
No. So that is not the independent clause. Numbers 1 through 6, you are only underlining the independent clause. Now look at the directions for the second part, the directions for numbers 7 through 10. You are not doing the same thing, so do not go through this sheet and underline the independent clause each time. Because for numbers 7 through 10, you are underlining the dependent clause. So look at example A under the second set of directions. It says, since he waited, he was able to enter. They underlined since he waited, because does that make sense all by itself? Since he waited. Zadie?
No.
No. So that is the dependent clause. It has a subject and a predicate. He is the subject, waited is the predicate, but since makes it a dependent clause. So on the front for numbers 1 through 6, you are only underlining the independent clause, the part that can stand alone. Some of you are not paying attention at all, and I will be able to tell so much when you turn it in. For the second part, you only underline the dependent clause, the part that does not make sense on its own. Now, turn to the back. You have 2 sets of directions again. Find the 2 sets of directions. Put your finger on each set of directions on the back. Put your finger on each set of directions on the back. There are 2 places where it says directions. The directions for the first part say, write a dependent clause to complete each complex sentence. Now, we haven't talked about complex sentences yet. We'll talk about that on Friday, but you're already using them. That's what these are. But don't worry, don't let complex sentences confuse you. That's just what these are. So, for the directions for the first part say, write a dependent clause to complete each complex sentence. Use the connecting words so, because, or since. So that means example A says the boy is happy blank. The boy is happy is an independent clause, so you have to add a dependent clause. They use the connecting word because and said because he had free time. So when you're on numbers 1 through 5 on the back, make sure that you use because, so, or since, and then write a subject and a predicate. Make sure it makes sense. For the second part, numbers 6 through 9, you are writing an independent clause. So are you going to use a connecting word for numbers 6 through 9? Are you going to use a connecting word for numbers 6 through 9 on the back? Victoria? No, because you're writing an independent clause. So example A, blank because he was late to school. They added, the boy was upset. Remember, when you're adding an independent clause, you're not just saying the boy because he was late to school. You have to add a full and complete sentence, something that makes sense. If you have questions about this, please, please, please come ask me. Do not just guess. But all you're doing on the front, numbers 1 through 6, you're underlining the independent clause, the part that can stand alone. Numbers 7 through 10, you're underlining the dependent clause, the part that can't stand alone. Then on the back, numbers 1 through 5, you're adding a dependent clause, something that starts with a connecting word, which makes it not able to stand alone. It still needs a subject and a predicate, but it's going to start with a connecting word. You have your choices here. You need to use so, because, or since. Then the directions for the second part, numbers 6 through 9, write an independent clause. So you will not use a connecting word, but you still need a subject and a predicate. Make sure your sentences make sense. So you need to read them after you write them. Okay, go ahead. You have like 30 minutes. This will be turned in. Both pages will be turned in, girls at home. If it says IP, it gets turned in.